Here is your full optimal guide on taking caffeine. So, before we start off, let's understand one thing between me and you. Caffeine is a stimulus. It's not something you can just spam, right? You can't just spam caffeine like a lot of people do nowadays. People are on 6, 8 cups of caffeine every single day. That is way too much caffeine in a day. You need to cut that down. Let's start off with the optimal range of caffeine you should take. You should take around 200 mg's of caffeine per one serving, and you should not go above 400 mg's in a total, like a full day. Now, 400 is like upper threshold. You want to like ideally stay below that, but if you're someone who really needs caffeine, 400 is like the maximum you can take per day. And try to like break it up into like 200 mg's now and 200 mg's later. You don't want to like ingest 400 mg's like all in one go. Now I know people take like pre-workout and then just like scoop that whole thing up and just take 400 mg's all in one go. Try to not do that, but just make sure your upper like limit per day doesn't go over 400 mg's. So let's talk about the timing of caffeine. The timing is really important. It's probably the most important thing about caffeine usage. So a lot of people, when they first wake up, they just drink a coffee and they get their caffeine in right when they wake up. Now, you need to understand that the process of caffeine, what caffeine does, it's not something that just gives you energy. What caffeine does is it blocks a receptor that you have called adenosine. Now, adenosine is responsible for making you feel sleepy. All caffeine does is it just blocks that receptor. Now, if you take caffeine within the first 90 to 120 minutes of waking up, you're gonna block that receptor. But what you're also gonna do is cause yourself to have a caffeine crash, because essentially what happens, you take your caffeine, your adenosine receptors get blocked. Now when the caffeine is worn off and the effect of caffeine is like gone down, those adenosine receptors come back, and they don't just come back normally. They come back in like double or triple of what they were before, which causes you to just feel way sleepier, because adenosine, as we know, as I said before, is responsible for making you feel tired. When you block the receptors that make you feel tired, and whatever you blocked it with, which is caffeine, is what we're using. If you block your receptors that make you feel tired with caffeine, when that caffeine wears off, you're gonna get that caffeine crash a lot of people say they do. So, optimal time to take caffeine after ideally 2 hours of waking up. That's like the ideal 120 minutes, 2 hours of waking up. You can do like 90 to 120 minutes, so like 1.5 hours to like 2 hours, but nothing before that. Absolutely not. Another thing that I want you to keep in mind when you're taking caffeine is gonna dehydrate you. So you want to like supplement yourself with some electrolytes, or if you don't have electrolytes, you can just put like a pinch of Celtic sea salt or Himalayan sea salt in your glass of water and just drink that up before you take your caffeine. Because what a lot of people do is they just take caffeine and they get dehydrated and they just feel terrible. So make sure you take your electrolytes, take your like Celtic sea salt before you take your caffeine. So delay caffeine for the first 90 to 120 minutes. Now, this, you should probably already know what I'm about to say next. You don't want to drink caffeine like in the evening, because that's gonna significantly like affect your sleep. So the cutoff rate for caffeine, the half-life of caffeine is like 5 to 6 hours, which means that it's gonna, if you take caffeine at like 4, you're still gonna have like, let's say your bedtime's at 10. If you take caffeine at 4 p.m., you're still gonna have like half of that dosage in your system, right? So if you take caffeine at, let's say, 12 plus, 6 times 2, which is 12. If you take caffeine at 12, you're gonna have caffeine in your system until 12 at night. So you want to ideally like take caffeine and cut it off like as early as you can, preferably before 12 in the morning. Let's say you wake up at 8 in the morning, you don't eat caffeine for the first 2 hours, so you drink a cup of coffee at 10, and then you cut off that caffeine before 12. So you have like a 2 hour window of taking caffeine. Now, that's obviously very like, it's a short window, right? If you wake up at 8 and go to sleep at 10, you have like a 2 hour window to ingest caffeine, because caffeine, it has like a lot of effects on you when it comes to like adenosine and all the stuff we talked about. So make sure the timing is, you don't want to take in the first 2 hours you wake up, and you don't want to take it like 10 hours before you're going to sleep, like roughly around there. You can see what works for you. If you're like somebody who isn't affected by caffeine as much, you might be able to go a little further. If you're like really affected by caffeine, then you might need to like shorten that window. Does that make sense? Now, another point I have to this is, a lot of people will feel like, I took caffeine at 4 p.m. and I don't feel the caffeine at 10, when I'm about to go to sleep. Now, my rebuttal to that is, you might not feel it and you might be able to go to sleep, but the quality of your sleep when you take that caffeine is going to be significantly worse, because your heart rate's up, you're not as like rested. There's just a lot of stuff that's going to happen to you if you have caffeine in your system when you go to sleep. A lot of people think it's just, oh, I can't go to sleep if I have caffeine, and if I can go to sleep, then that means the caffeine doesn't have an effect on me. Common side effect of taking caffeine in the evening is you can't go to sleep. But some people like overcome that and they do go to sleep, but they have like a terrible sleep. Does that make sense? So even if you're someone who doesn't like feel energized, or doesn't think that like caffeine has an effect on you because you can go to sleep right away, it does, right? So try to still follow these protocols as best as you can. Next point on how to optimally use caffeine. There's a supplement out there called L-theanine, which is gonna help you if you're somebody who feels very jittery and very like anxious when you have caffeine. This supplement is gonna help you kind of calm those jitters down and just turn that caffeine into like pure, deep energy, and something that you can actually use to like fuel your work and everything that you need the caffeine for. So a lot of people have this habit when they take caffeine, they feel jittery, they feel anxious, they just feel like there's so much going on. If you buy a supplement called L-theanine, this is gonna basically calm your system down, and whatever energy you feel jittery and like anxious with, it's gonna basically channel that energy into like a deep focus that you can use to like work out, or you can use to like get into like deep work and get into that flow. Now, you may be wondering, what's like the optimal dosage of like L-theanine I should take? So let's say you drink 100 mgs of caffeine, you want to take 200 mgs of theanine. Simple as that. This is going to basically help smoothen out any like jitters you have, and it's going to be the optimal range of L-theanine you should take. Now, the optimal ratio for caffeine to L-theanine is 1:2, which means if you're taking 100 mgs of caffeine, you want to take 200 mgs of L-theanine. Now, what does this mean if you're somebody who takes 400 mgs of caffeine? Like, how much theanine do you need at that point? At that point, I'll recommend that you take somewhere from like 400 mgs to 600 mgs of L-theanine for every like 400 mgs of caffeine you take. Now, yes, the optimal range is like for 1:2, and if you take 400 mgs, optimally you should be taking 800 mgs, but you can get away with taking 400 to 600 mgs at that point. Now, as we mentioned earlier in the video, if you're somebody who needs 400 mgs of caffeine, you're doing something wrong, right? Like, you don't need to take 400 mgs of caffeine every single day. You want to like try to like slowly like lower that down into like the more optimal range. You can take 400 mgs, but it's not ideal, as we mentioned earlier in the video. So if you're someone who takes 400 mgs of L-theanine, or sorry, if you take 400 mgs of caffeine, you can get away with taking 400 to 600 mgs of L-theanine, but 800 is like the optimal range. There's your protocols, there's your guides, there's like all the advice you need on caffeine. At the end of the day, you want to try getting your energy from working out, getting sunlight, recovering well, sleeping well, eating well. Like this is where your main energy should come from. And if you want to like have a stimulant on top of that, a kind of supplement as you'd like to say, you can take caffeine, right? But at the end of the day, you should not be relying on caffeine for like all of your energy. I know this is hard for some people because some people like they wake up really early in the morning, go to work, and then work all day and they come home late at night. So they like need caffeine. But ideally try to like lower that down, try to like work out more, try to, get sunlight, try to recover well, try to rest well, try to do all these like habits that will naturally give you energy, and try to lower your dose of like caffeine over time. You don't want to like rely on 400 mgs, or some people even take more than that. You don't want to rely on that as your main source of energy. So try to like lower that down, take the stimulants, but don't rely on it for energy.